Good afternoon and welcome to the Hibs Observer's tactical breakdown from Hibs 3, Dundee United 1 at the weekend. A return to winning ways for David Gray's side after what we are calling a glitch up in Aberdeen the previous week, where the unbeaten run in the league was brought to a shuddering halt with a 1-0 defeat. But normal service resumed on Saturday at Easter Road. Martin Boyle, Mikola Kujarevic and Dwight Gale off the bench, giving Hibs a 3-1 victory in what was probably a huge result in the race for third place in the Scottish Premiership. I'm joined, as always, by Craig Nisbet. Craig, you were at the game. What did you make of it and how are you?
Really enjoyed the game. I thought it was a really well-rounded performance, especially after the glitch last week. Back to winning ways, back to seeing Gray utilising that full squad, everybody playing their part, which I know he's a really big fan of, and happy with the results elsewhere. So all in all, a very good weekend. And I enjoyed being in the press box with you. Apologies for the celebrations for the first goal, but then I think I learned how to conduct myself after that. So hopefully I'll be invited back.
Understandable. I think when you're watching Gray's team, it's sort of fluid best, which we certainly saw in the first half on Saturday. It's to be expected. Just before we get down to business, quick word from our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. It's time to hand in your transfer request, and do head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Right, without further ado, I've said there in the intro, but I mean, it was a really good performance by Hibs overall. I think we said this at the start of the season at times that it was quite difficult watching Hibs, but they've kind of become fun to watch now, I think. And I think, I think David Gray said this, I think Warren O'Hora said this as well, that the team maybe wasn't at full tilt against Aberdeen. And there was a lot of talk about reactions and kind of bouncing back. And I think we certainly saw that on Saturday. It wasn't just a reaction, it was more it was like a real return to form. Because there's been some games where Hibs haven't been at their best and they have managed to get, the 3 points. And I think there was always a kind of feeling that wasn't going to last. There was going to come a time where they would become unstuck, which proved so at Pittodrie. But it really was a really entertaining game from a Hibs fan's point of view. And if it hadn't been for Jack Walton, I think the halftime score could have been a lot more than 2-0, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tweeted before the game that you expected a fast start, and especially with the lineup as well, with Mikola coming back in and starting, you knew we were going to be on the front foot in terms of our pressing, and Hoylett back in as well in terms of looking to get on the ball and create. So you could tell that we were going to go out and go on the front foot. And I think that first half, we just smothered Dundee United. They couldn't really get anything going. They did have little spells of possession, but we were turning the ball over and counter attacking, and it was just, you're spot on. There were so many chances in that first half. We obviously got a couple of goals, which was great, but it could have been a lot more. And there was a couple of great saves from Walton, peppered in there as well. So yeah, it was the perfect response, and it just got Easter Road absolutely bouncing. It was a wee bit tricky going into the second half, first 15 minutes in the second half when Dundee United make some changes, which we'll talk about. But then once we made our changes as well, the game just, I think, swung back in our direction. We were able to get that third goal and get the 3 points.
Yeah, you talked about the changes there. Mikola Kujarevic coming back in, Junior Hoylett coming back in place of Kieran Bowie and Josh Campbell, respectively. Both of them did well off the bench, but hard to argue with those changes, I think, after the game at Aberdeen, and given what both Kujarevic and Hoylett have done, especially recently, in this Hibs team, it sort of made sense that those would be the changes that Gray would make, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought last week it was a surprise to see, Campbell and Bowie come back in to a certain extent, just because, Hoylett and Kujarevic in those roles have done so well. And, when we went away to Rangers, I maybe expected Campbell and Bowie to come in at that point, but they didn't, and he stuck with Hoylett and Kujarevic, and I thought that gave us a bit of a blueprint for maybe even playing away from home as well, that we can make that work. But I understand that when you look back, Campbell's had some great performances against Aberdeen, and he was great up there when we beat them in December. His aerial ability was really key with Boyle and Yuan up top. So I could see why he came in, and obviously Bowie got himself a couple of goals. So it's probably one of those things for a manager that you feel like it's it's time to put him back in the starting lineup. But there's no doubt we don't play differently with those guys in the team, but they've got different strengths and weaknesses, and it does change how the top end of the pitch looks. And I think for this home game against Dundee United, who are going to look to play out as well and try and get the ball down, you need Mikola's pressing ability up there. And as we saw, if you do get the ball and you do turn it over, you need Hoylett's quality to sort of thread passes through and create those chances, especially in the opening part of the game. So, yeah, I think he got the team. We maybe spoke about that. He maybe overthought it last week, but it was back to just getting the team right, and the subs as well. It was all perfect game plan.
And speaking of game plan, here's the race chart from StatsBomb, which kind of shows you, just how the game panned out. I think the only surprising thing for me here is possibly the sort of chances of, if this game was played again, the chances of Hibs winning maybe isn't as high as you might have expected, which maybe reflects that little period in the second half where Dundee United came back into it.
Yeah, that is a surprise. The first, the opening 20-25 minutes, we were, we were smothering them, and we were getting lots of turnovers and forcing Walton into some big saves. And then, I would probably say the game did level out. We did sort of, especially when you get 2 goals, it's easy at that point to then sit back a little bit, conserve a bit of energy, get your foot on the ball, and naturally Dundee United would get back into it. But obviously, when they made those changes at half-time, that changed things up, and it sort of caught us out for 15 minutes or so until we made our changes. Then you can just see that the game just kind of ran away from them again after that point, and you can just see us gradually, turning the screw a little bit towards the end, and getting that final goal. And they've obviously got their goal highlighted there. Then obviously I think Smith with his really excellent save. Where he clattered into the post, but apart from that, I can't really. And obviously they had a free header, a crucial free header, probably round about that 80th minute mark there. Actually, maybe when that came about. So they had their moments, but I think even Jim Goodwin said after we were in the press conference after it was few and far between, and not enough to get something out of that game. But that is a surprise, actually, looking at the percentages at the top there.
Yeah, I think. David Gray spoke about this before the game. He was saying that the previous games against Dundee United this season have been quite difficult. There's not been an awful lot between the two teams. Even though obviously the last game did finish 3-1, there was a lot of VAR decisions that kind of dominated the post-match discussions, and Hibs obviously scoring in the 90th minute through Kieran Bowie, and then getting that sort of late third from Hoylett. It did sort of feel a little bit like gloss. And so I think it was a bit surprising. Dundee United have had their injury concerns. Again, Goodwin spoke about that, but didn't want to sort of put it down as a main sort of reason for what was probably a bit of a below par performance. And he was saying all teams have had their issues, which is fair enough. But I think it was for me a good example of Gray not sort of underestimating a team. And when you combine that with wanting a reaction from a defeat, and getting back to Easter Road, and so much of the season has been about sort of targets, and they're not setting out to equal records or beat records, but this game was, I think, the 7th league win at home on the trot, 8th in all competitions, and that's sort of pretty impressive in its own right. And you kind of feel that with the 17-game unbeaten run in the league going, it's now about there's other little targets they can put in place. And I imagine David Gray would have been saying to his players behind closed doors that the chance to extend that sort of winning run at home would have been just one of the kind of prizes on offer for a good performance, and we certainly got that. I've just put in the passing network from the first half and the second half, partly because I think you can see how deep Kurevic was sitting in the first half. I think everyone sees him up top and thinks he's going to be sort of leading the line, but very much kind of dropping in, between midfield and attack. And then the second half, I think the big thing for me is just how deep Rocky Bashiri's sitting compared to everyone else.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? I think it kind of does say in the show in the first half, like, it's no surprise that Levitt's got one of the bigger circles there. I think him and Triantis had a lot of time on the ball. We were getting a lot of turnovers, and they were they were cooking, as they say, in the middle of the park and making things happen. And and we talk about that left hand side. Last week I thought, and actually, as we'll maybe talk about Campbell coming on and what he can do down that left hand side. But there's no doubt, for those who have watched this closely this season, that Obita and Hoylett have a really good relationship down the left hand side. They complement each other really well. Their movements seem to be in sync. So, it's no surprise. I think Obita has some of his best games when Hoylett's in that position as well. And there's good spacing across the pitch. And Chris Cadden obviously having quite a big impact as well. Obviously with the assist. We'll give him the assist for the first goal, but in and around that. But you're right. When you look at the second half, and we were speaking about the game when you bring somebody like Kieran Bowie on and you bring Gale on. You've had Kurevich and Boyle running and stretching the game. You've had Hoylett dropping off the game, getting into those spaces. When those three come off and you're able to put Campbell and Bowie and then Dwight Gale on, you're then getting a lot of power. And Kieran Bowie, somebody who's looking to hold the ball up and roll people and get stuck in. Campbell, who's willing to go running for lost causes and chase the ball in behind and even carry the ball in behind as well. And then Dwight Gale just on the shoulder, ready for any crosses. For a defence, it's a pretty long afternoon to deal with that, and it just goes to the strength and the depth of the squad. And it's just interesting to see Campbell coming off the bench and having a decent sort of on-ball value there, especially having only got like maybe half an hour. I think he came on in about the 60th minute. So, that's really good to see. And even, again, Levitt and Triantis picking back up in on-ball value in the second half as well, because they did drift out the game, I think, in that little 15-minute, 20-minute spell that Dundee United had. But certainly once we made our changes, they managed to get themselves back in.
Yeah, I think also worth highlighting. I mean, Nicky Cadden in the second half with that very impressive on-ball value, given how little time he was on the pitch compared to some others. But again, just Junior Hoylett actually more effective, on the ball in the second half than the first, which I think probably says something, and especially when you consider that taking him off was probably a bit of a bold call. I think just because of how influential he'd been in the game, but bringing Campbell on, as we saw, did have its benefits and did probably play a big part in him sort of finally managing. Well, he was certainly involved in the third goal, but just having his energy on the in the final third played a big part in him sort of gaining the upper hand again, didn't it?
No, it definitely did, and I think we're going to do a little video later in the week sort of talking about Josh Campbell coming off the bench and Hoylett, and maybe looking at the two of them, because at different times they've had they're very different players, how they see that role. And I think Campbell is used differently when he comes off the bench and when he starts. I think they try to have him play a bit like Junior Hoylett last week against Aberdeen, and I don't think it worked quite as well. But certainly when he came on against Dundee United, there was a little tweak in formation, and then we've got a lot of clips of just how Campbell did have a really big impact. He played a really big part in the final goal as well. And it's really interesting to look at those two players and just how they've evolved across the season. But you're right, it was I think when we were sitting, I sort of thought Hoylett, not on the ball, but off the ball, was starting to slip a little bit in terms of tracking back, and we were kind of getting overrun, I thought, down both channels, especially when Trapanovsky and Middleton came on. There was definitely, Dundee United definitely started to catch us out when they matched us. So it makes sense to bring Campbell on into those positions, and he can also track back into those areas as well that maybe Hoylett that wouldn't do as much. So it's not to say Hoylett's not good off the ball, because he's very good off the ball. He knows where to be. He's an experienced player. He knows how to block off spaces. But as games wear on, and this is what Gray said in the press conference, the team that starts is not the team that finishes, and he needs everybody coming off and performing. And that's what, looking back at the game, that's what it was. It was just he was using all the players to the best of their abilities at the right time.
Yeah, and I think certainly when you consider the injuries he's had to deal with this season, it must be, like he said it himself in one press conference, he said, it's a very nice headache to have, which I think sums it up. But moving on to the game itself, Hibs with a very early lead. They did kind of start the game on fire, just a fast start, which I think is probably something that Gray would have been asking for, just because of the importance of the game, and just that, kind of settling the home crowd a little bit after the Aberdeen game. But I mean, the first goal, I know in the end it was maybe not the prettiest thing we'll see, but the sort of build up to it, and certainly the pass from Hoylett, which we'll see later on, was a thing of beauty, I think, fair to say.
Yeah, and you know, people that watch every week know that this is the shape we always highlight, this 2-3 that we've got, and you know, we did have it last week against Aberdeen, but it was just a little bit. It just didn't seem to quite click last week. Our distances weren't as great, but here you can see you've got Kurevich on the right, Boyle in the centre, Hoylett on the left, and they're just sort of matching Dundee United's back three because they play a similar sort of setup, and you know, Boyle sort of stopping that ball going into the six, but you can see Levitt and Triantis are probably, you know, heads on a swivel, checking behind them, but also getting ready to jump and press if the ball does break through between Boyle and Hoylett, for example. And then obviously if the ball goes wide from Gallagher into either the right or the left centre halves, then Hoylett and Kurevich go out to press. But yeah, we're in a really good shape. And if you go into the next clip, you can see there just Gallagher kind of pauses on the ball. You can see Levitt's ready to go there. It'll be us matching the wing back on that side. You can see Iredale's stepping forward. Rocky's actually sort of covering him just off the clip there. But what this does is it forces Dundee United back. And if you go into that next clip, they work it out to this side, but you can see they're shifting over. Their movements are also almost sort of not robotic in a bad way, but just very organised. They know where they need to go. You can see Hoylett coming across, Levitt moving central, Triantis coming into that space. And if you go into the next clip, one thing that it goes back and you can see a long ball's fine, and we do this as well. And actually, we ended up going. Both teams started to go quite long at various points because we were pressing each other very, very well. But if you go into that next clip, what I think we're brilliant at and what the back three are really good at is this: just getting ahead, getting contact with the striker, and intercepting the ball. Miller's great at it. O'Hora, you know, we've not seen much of him in that role, but I think he's grown into it, and I thought he was much better in this game than he was against Aberdeen, and he sort of pinches the ball here, and he wins it really, really well. And there's other examples of Iredale and Rocky doing that as well, especially with Dalby, not letting him turn and get a movement on him. And I think that's one thing the back three have been brilliant at. So O'Hora gets in here, he gets his body, and he wins the ball. If you go into the next clip, it breaks to Levitt. And I think Levitt and Hoylett have started to build a connection. And obviously we'll touch on this in the other video, but that picture there of Hoylett, that's why he probably should get another year. And that's probably why, and for me, he has to start these type of games because he'll just pick himself up in this position here. The midfielders you can see Dundee United's midfield is really split there. The centre halves aren't going to want to come out into that space, especially when you've got Boyle running off them. And what that does when Levitt, and then because you've got the quality of Levitt or Triantis who can find them, if you go into that next clip, Hoylett's then got time to turn, and you know that's a really, really, really good pass, especially with
players around him who can't stop him.
three players around him, and he bends it round, and you've also got, you know, Sibbald and the returning left wing back trying to get back into position as well. So the weight of the pass is brilliant, and I didn't really kind of realise it until the watch back that Cadden hits it first time, you know, across the goal. There's no need for him to take a touch, and it's just a beautifully weighted pass. And you can see there, you know, Kurevich is driving into the box. Boyle obviously now recognising, well, that ball's going into that space that I was in, so I need to get out of it and get across into the middle. If you go into that next clip, Cadden plays it first time across, and of course, listen, they get the element of luck. It's really bad defending. You know, you're just told to just clear that out for a corner and deal with it after. But he obviously tries to. I think it's Gallagher tries to sort of back heel it out the way, but Boyle's in the right position, and I think that's where he gets the credit, and he deserves the luck because he's in the right position. It bounces off him and creeps into the corner, and just you know. If Boyle slides in and hits that into top corner, like what a goal you're looking at. It's just a shame the finish was kind of comical because it maybe takes the shine off just how good a press it was from us to force Dundee United long. O'Hora winning it, Levitt's ball, Hoylett's ball, Cadden's cross, and you know you can see that like 10-15 seconds later we're 1-0 up.
Yeah, and I mean I think it's one of those. You've got Martin Boyle who's obviously trying to hit 100 goals for Hibs before, I think what it looks like before the season's up. But I think, you know, one of the things we've seen with Hibs when they were on the unbeaten run, that it's about, you know, getting yourself into these positions because, you know, 9 times out of 10 it might not come off, but you know, Gray speaks a lot about wanting his players to be in certain positions and to, you know, get into the right positions, because for, as we were saying, for the 9 times it doesn't work out, there's going to be that one time that it does. And I think, you know, it does. We've probably seen it. We've probably seen the players sort of grow into this. You were talking about O'Hora kind of growing into the role that he's got, but when you consider Boyle, that sort of period just before things started to turn, when he was sort of starting games on the bench, and it was, you know, there were kind of questions over his influence and if he still had what it took. And I think he's certainly shut up a few naysayers with his performance in the second half of the season and at the start of that run. But you know, just that sort of, just having that vision to, as you say, move out of the way initially when Hoylett threads it through to Cadden, but then to be on the kind of the heels of Gallagher so that you can, you know, pounce on you know, a loose ball if there is, or in this case get lucky when it sort of bounces off him.
Yeah, it's just everybody, all these players evolving, and it's consistency. Me and Liam speak about it a lot on the show when there was times earlier in the season when we had no consistency because people were getting injured or sent off, and you know, Gray was trying to change things up to try and get results, whereas now we're kind of like a really well-oiled machine. And you know, we've touched on everybody has their roles, and I think Boyle's really excelled in this sort of central position where he isn't. You know, I think we highlighted earlier in the season. I actually think it was against Dundee United actually where we spoke about we need to get him, you know, in and around the box, you know, dribbling at players 1v1 or in these spaces. We can't really put the ball out to him on the wing anymore and expect him to run past and beat players. But in and around these positions here, over 5-10 yards, he's still so quick and so agile that he's a nightmare for defenders. And I dare say Dwight Gale's been probably schooling him in movement in and around the box because, yeah, it's a really good bit of movement to get him into that space.
It is, and speaking of this kind of mechanical, this robotic kind of you know, performance from the players, if we look at how Hibs were out of possession, I think there's an awful lot to talk about here as well, as there usually is, but especially so in this game, which really kind of really blunted Dundee United for the first 45 minutes, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, and it's again people that watch, you know, over the last couple of weeks. It's always a little segment we try and look at because I think the players deserve. One of the reasons we actually show it so much is because the players just deserve so much credit because it's such a hard. The way that Gray's asking them to play, there is a lot of running, there's a lot of sacrifice running, there's a lot of communication to make sure if you go forward, your teammates tucking in, and I think that's why he deserves. And the players so much credit for this. So yeah, you can see here, it's not always that you know the front three are going to stop balls into the centre of the pitch. And Dundee United, you know, they are where they are in the league because they are able to open up teams. So it would make sense that they were opening us up. But you can see here as the ball goes in, Levitt straight on it. If you go into the next clip, as you know, you can see we just get close, so we get tight around the player on the ball. If you go into the next clip, that forces it back, and again you can see that we're starting to smother, and that's Triantis, Levitt, Hoylett, Kurevich and Boyle in there, and you can sort of see the back five creeping up as well, trying to get forward. If you go into the next clip, as they then play that ball, there's another example of what I was saying about O'Hora. The ball makes it through to Dalby, but there's Rocky straight through, straight in, and then if you just pause like where I've clipped it now, you can just see, look how close we all are together. You know, there's barely any distance between the back five and the front three. And that's what you want. And that's where the strength is of this team, is that now, if you imagine, I can't actually remember what happens in this clip, but if that breaks to Levitt now, suddenly you turn, you've got Boyle in behind, you've got Hoylett, you've got Kurevich, you've got these quick players and clever players to exploit that. And, you know, it's one of those things, if your back five are too deep, then Dalby gets into that position and turns and Dundee United attack. If, you know, the front three aren't doing their job, it's easy for them to get through, and Levitt and Triantis might get pulled out. So it's just such a, you know, they've obviously done a lot of hard work on the training pitch, and you can just see the benefits of that now, plus the wins and the confidence in the team that they're able to play like that, because it's not easy.
Yeah, it does seem, I mean, go back to watching football however many years ago, and, you know, sometimes you see teams and like pundits would talk about, or the manager would talk about, like hunting in packs, and it almost feels that this is a kind of version of that. I mean, certainly looking at that picture, it's wild when you think that that's all 10 outfield players in such a small space. But as you point out, it's kind of been a base for the success really from kind of start of December onwards. You know, that it doesn't matter who's playing, it doesn't matter who comes in, it doesn't matter what stage of the game it is. There is this kind of mechanical understanding that, you know, this is what we need to do, you know, in this passage of play, this is who needs to be here, this is who needs to be there. And it's just, I mean, you know, saying it's tiring for the players to, you know, kind of put it into practice, which I think is why Gray so often makes use of all the subs at his disposal. But it also must be quite tiring for opposition teams as well, just to keep sort of coming again and trying to break it down, trying to play through the press, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it can be so tiring just trying to get to grips with such a well-oiled team, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. And if you are trying to, both teams, like listen, they'll turn up and they'll be looking to execute a game plan, and they'll no doubt find some of the the pockets of space or the ways they think they can hurt Hibs. And yeah, it's if you're on the ball and you're trying to make things tick and you're 1-0 down after a couple of minutes, and then this is what you're dealing with. The crowd are up, everyone's confident. It's a tough it's a tough place to play and a tough place to be. And I think it was it Ferry who came into the press conference after and kind of spoke about the fact that they just couldn't get going in that first half. And obviously they were really embarrassed about their performance, but there was elements of they were really trying to get on the ball and trying to make things work, but we were so ruthless out of possession that we just made it so difficult for them. And I think if you go into the next clip, I don't know if I've got another example, but even from like goal kicks as well, they were willing to play it from the back, and Hibs tried as well. And as I said, both teams ended up just going, we'll just go direct, because it was just been it was too much, I think. But you can see here again, like you just look at the intensity of Boyle's press, Levitt coming across, Cadden on that side as well. If you go into the next clip, this is actually where they do try and play in, but Levitt's in and we pinch the ball. And then again, this is where that next clip, if you go now, you've got Boyle and Kurevich just inside the goal, and this is when Boyle cuts it back. Kurevich makes the shot. It's a great save from Walton, and Hoylett's on the follow-up, and it's another brilliant save from Walton as well. But I think as well that at that point for Dundee United, they've had the ball high up the pitch and been turned over, smothered. They're thinking, right, well, if we play it from the back and maybe bring Hibs closer to us, if we play through them, there'll be space in behind for us to attack. But we were able to pinch the ball off them and win it in positions like this as well. And I think if that happens to you as well, you're maybe abandoning your playing out from the back for a little while because you're concerned. It forces you to go long, and we're a team that we like. If teams go long, we're really good at trying to get the turnover and attacking. So it kind of played into our hands a little bit. And again, I was well. Obviously, Kurevich gets his goal, which was brilliant, but I was really gutted that this didn't end up a goal as well, because it just would have been another good example of just what we're like out of possession and that hunger and ruthlessness.
Definitely. And I mean, I think it's, we spoke about this at the game, but I mean, Kurevich was playing a bit like a man possessed. I think I asked David Gray afterwards if that had been something he'd sort of, specifically requested, if he just wanted to see more from him. And I think it's maybe just the, if you're playing in this team, if you're getting those starts and, you're playing in front of not a full house, but a decent crowd at Easter Road when there's a lot still to play for. And when, the team's fun to watch, it must sort of just give the players that sort of little bit kind of extra kind of, impetus to think, no, I'm going to chase down sort of lost causes. I'm going to go in for 40, 60s, that sort of thing. I think we saw that from Miko on Saturday. We've seen it from all the players. But certainly seemed like a man who was keen to get a goal and didn't have to wait too long before he did.
No, yeah, and he spoke after in the press conference about is again just shows the type of boy he is and the character, saying about he was talking about Europe and how desperate he was to get the team to Europe. And then I think somebody said to him, "Well, you might not be here or you won't be here," and he's like, "Oh, I know, but it doesn't matter. That I want to do it for my teammates." And he would have been he had a right to be super disappointed last week to be dropped. In terms of just the work out of possession that he does, and I know sometimes fans get frustrated with him, but I think now you can see just that what we've got and what his strengths are. But this is just another example, just highlighting there. You can see this is where Dundee United did have the ball a bit further up the pitch, and I've highlighted Hoylett and Kurevich here because they've actually dropped back into a sort of deeper possession. There was actually a longer bit of possession from Dundee United, and actually when they started to move the ball, you could see at times it was Boyle, or at times in this example it was Kurevich dropping back into these deeper areas to do some defending. So if you go into the next clip, you can see as sort of Dundee United work the ball, they work it inside. And again, there's another example of Iredale this time going in strong, going in physical to try and get on to win the ball back and turn over. If you go into the next clip, he's. And as the ball works its way back out again, there's just another example of that shape. Kurevic has come back to the middle. Boyle's jogging back in, and you can just see there's we've seen it just in that last clip, just how tight they are together, just on the halfway line. But again, when teams are moving the ball, we're able to, there's nothing up, Hoylett and Boyle are willing to work back into those deeper positions. So is Kurevic. And, if you've got Dundee United in this position and they're moving the ball left to right, but they're just going in that kind of U shape, around the centre halves and to the other wing back and round, that's exactly where you want them. And you're just trying to stop them coming inside. And if they do, we've just highlighted a couple of clips there where we're able to turn them over. And then we've got that pace and quality on the counter attack.
Yeah. I think the illustration sort of sum it up really, and I think I said this in our sort of like reaction video at the game, that I'm not 100% sure Gray maybe gets enough credit for his tactical approach to these things. And I think when as part of the benefit of doing these videos is that we can kind of break it down and we can sort of see a little bit like the work that he's doing, with the team, setting them up for different challenges. So as you say, if teams are going long, then Hibs are well set up to deal with that. If teams try to play through them, then equally they can adapt to that as well. And I think that's, you don't get manager of the year nominations without other managers kind of recognizing that and kind of being appreciative of it. But it's maybe not got the coverage it deserves. Just in terms of how sort of slick Hibs have been at times this season, the tactical approach and how it's differed, because we know that there's certain games require a degree of pragmatism, there's certain games that require a totally different approach. And I think maybe not initially, but certainly now, I think Gray's really kind of got that sort of worked out. You talk about this recent game at Ibrox against Rangers, a 2-0 win, where it would have been so easy to maybe overthink the team and to make a couple of changes, but instead I think he kept the same starting 11 and kind of reaped the rewards. So I think you look at this, you look at how well drilled they are, and it's maybe understandable, with a lot of people are only bothered about the 3 points on a Saturday or whenever the game is, but I think when you look at the tactical work that's been done, I think it's a big reason why Hibs are where they are.
No, massively. And I think the one thing that always stands out for me is, he's done it with the same group of players that we were in a bit of a mess with earlier on in the season. January wasn't massive for us. Alassane Amani came in and, got sent off and hasn't really played since, because they're obviously wanting to build them up and take time. But it's not like in January we went out and, splurged on loads of signings to try and correct things. It's just that same group and working with them, and he's obviously come up with solutions in-house, and there's been a little change in formation, there's been little changes of personnel throughout the season, and he's obviously built such a great team spirit where I'm sure no player's happy to be left out and on the bench. But I'm sure somebody asked that to Kurevic about being left out for a bit, and he was sort of going, well, yeah, I was left a bit, then I come on and try and play, and this week I'm starting and he'll be coming on trying, and they just seem to have a really good sort of balance in the team where there's a lot of respect for each other and what they do. So it does mean when people are coming on, they're not sulking, they're coming on to show what they can do and the hope that they'll get a start the following week.
Indeed. If we move on, for some reason I've got the Dundee United goal in here instead of the Hibs second goal, which is probably going to come later. But
okay,
let's talk about.
That's fine.
Just like to mix it up
That's
a bit.
fine.
Keep you on your toes.
That's all right.
I mean, this goal came. Dundee United made a couple of changes at halftime, which I think was probably an effort just to kind of get back into the game. And for that, there was a kind of 15-20 minute period where they were quite. They were sort of like on the front foot. They were sort of asking questions of Hibs, and maybe was a little bit nervy. For Hibs, just in terms of, I mean, we know what Dundee United are like. The games we've seen Hibs play previously against them, they are very tight. So I think it wasn't a huge surprise that they came back into it. But a little bit of an unfortunate goal from Hibs' point of view, avoidable, but just one of these things that can happen, isn't it?
I don't know what it is with Kurevic in the box against Dundee United. It seems to be such an issue. But Yeah, and the subs like Babinski went off and Van der Sande went off, who really struggled. And I thought Van der Sande really struggled in the game. Babinski tried to get into it, but just couldn't quite make it happen. But yeah, they put on Trapanovsky and Middleton and essentially matched us up. They then put those two either sides of Dalby, had their two in the centre of midfield. They then just had their three centre halves and their two wing backs, and they basically just matched us up. And I think one thing that any back five struggles with is pacing behind, and that's where the corners came from. Is just they were able, instead of trying to go into Van der Sande's feet and Dalby's feet and play off them, they had Middleton stretching, they had Trapanovsky stretching. So that's kind of where the first corner comes from. And I think they get a strike from outside the box that leads to this corner. But yeah, if you go into the next clip, you can see I've highlighted Miko here, and as the ball comes in, he's in. It's not a bad position, but I think probably what they'll be saying to him is you should always be like you can see Boyle and like you can see Abita and Rocky doing there. Boyle's actually not doing it. Is get contact. Get some contact. Get your arm out. Get a grip of them. Not to foul or anything like that, but just to make sure you know where they are. If you go into the next clip, it's kind of like a lofting ball, and you can see he just takes a step forward, and then you can almost see he's going, "Oh, I've mistimed this," which can happen. And it's Trapanovsky at the back post, and it's really unfortunate because Trapanovsky hits off him, Kurevich back off Trapanovsky, back off Kurevich, and actually bobbles down for Kurevich to try and clear. But and I'm sure we've all been there in this next clip. He takes a swipe. This is where it sort of bounces off. So he's up there and he just has a big swipe. He's off balance. He takes a big swipe to clear it. He misses it. And to be fair, the more I've watched it, it's a brilliant finish from Trapanovsky, because that's quite a tricky angle. He hits it really cleanly. There's not much space to do that, and it's a good finish. And it certainly, I think they just caught us. They caught us off guard a little bit, just in the start of that second half. And I mean, I wouldn't say they were deserving of a goal, but they took that chance, and it did change the dynamics of the game for the next sort of 15-20 minutes.
You talked about the substitutes and how they did kind of change things, and here's a kind of example of how they did sort of add a little bit more sort of attacking intent to United in the second half. This is before the goal. I think sums up what you were saying just about how much they sort of altered Dundee United's approach in the final third.
Yeah, I mean, you can see here, this is Dalby on the ball now, and you can see that's Middleton running in sort of between Rocky and Iredale and Trapanovsky on the other side. And if you go into the next clip, how many times have we seen Rocky out here? Very rarely, very, very rarely, because we've not been caught out like that before to try and do it. And obviously, Middleton didn't have particularly great time at Hibs when he was here, but he's obviously developed and matured as a player, and he does have great pace, and he's got a brilliant delivery as well on left-footed, and you can just see that just added a real danger to that side for us, whereas before for the centre halves, it was Dalby and Van der Sande just sort of backing in, Sib centre halves are very, very comfortable with that, and they never really had anybody running in behind. There was nobody really stretching the game. Even Sybil, Babinski, they're players that like to get on the ball, so everything was just in front of us, so it was really comfortable. Whereas, once that pace came on in behind, it was difficult. And listen, I thought Obita dealt with Trapanovsky really well on his side. He defended him really, really well, but that they're still gaining territory. They're getting throw-ins, they're getting corners, and this is actually where the first original corner comes from. It comes in, and we end up. I think if you go into the next clip, I actually think it's Trapanovsky that ends up getting on the ball and getting the shot away off O'Hora. And as I said, that first corner comes in, it gets cleared. There's a shot from the edge of the box that gets deflected out, and that leads to the corner that they get the goal from. So instant impact from both Middleton and Trapanovsky off the bench for Dundee United.
Yeah, just felt a little bit like one of those where, I think quite often, it's maybe understandable if you're 2 goals up, if it's been a fairly straightforward first half and the opposition hasn't really threatened. It's maybe psychologically, it's maybe a bit difficult to come out all guns blazing again for the second half. And if you're maybe aware if they've made a couple of changes like Dundee United do, you maybe want to spend a bit of time just to kind of feel out what they are, so that you're not getting caught out. But obviously in this case, it was, again, there was a degree of sort of good fortune for them in that the ball broke for Trapanovsky, and it was a sort of unfortunate sequence of events for Kurevich and how that happened. But it's interesting because I think we've seen this in a few games. I think probably obviously a different scoreline at the time, but in the sort of reverse fixture at Tannadice earlier earlier this year. I know there was the VAR stuff. I know Dundee United did kind of go ahead at one point, I think it was. But, Hibs' reaction to losing goals, I think, has been a lot better in the second half of the season, or, since the kind of unbeaten run started. So when they're losing goals, there isn't, there is this feel where you just thought, even against Aberdeen, you thought, well, they've not been at their best. And, it was a little bit, you had Nicky Cadden sort of playing a more central role, and you had Dwight Gale coming on at a strange time. But you did sort of still feel like, you wouldn't sort of count Hibs out. There was a chance that they might still get something. And I certainly think from, certainly from watching this game yesterday, from watching other games, when the opposition teams are threatening, if they do score a goal and they get into it, then there's always that kind of feeling that Hibs will just kind of go up the other end and either just, increase the pressure a little bit, or, just go up and score again. And I think we sort of saw that on Saturday. There was that sort of period that Dundee United enjoyed a bit more, a bit more of the ball, and they were sort of asking a few questions. Jordan Smith obviously had that really good save from Manny Adebayorega, but it didn't seem to sort of fluster Hibs. They didn't seem to be too sort of bothered by it. Whereas earlier in the season, I think it could, not to exaggerate, but I think it could have been sort of like a hammer blow for them. In the this game probably could have finished 2-2 if it had been played during that sort of the first sort of like 12, 13 games.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's it. And not only do you feel confident that off the bench we can change it and be a threat in the final, because I think that's also an important part as well. If Dundee United are pushing for it and they see Campbell and Bowie and Nicky Cadden and Gale coming on, you do have to watch in behind you. There's players that'll know that, they'll know their threats, and that changes things as well. But also, we're just more resolute. And we're just, you sort of feel that we get blocks in at good times, and that in the way we defend and things like that. So, yeah, when we conceded the goal, it was a little bit of a blow, but you felt confident that, and there was an element of luck to their goal as well, so there wasn't, I sort of felt it was a wee bit squeaky bum time. There was a couple of nerves that kicked in, but I think as we made the changes that, I think we got ourselves back into a strong way to see out the game. But sort of Pulp Fiction style, we'll go back to this clip, which kind of builds up. This is when things for Kurevic were going much better, and we're talking about all the tactical stuff and all the credit and all these things, but this is just quite a bizarre goal. And again, I think if you're Dundee United, you're really frustrated here because there's a long ball. I think O'Hora wins the first header against Van der Sande, and it kind of bounces down, and Triantis sort of gets sibbled out the way, and he just sort of volleys it through. That's all he really does. And you can just see, I just highlighted Dundee United sort of back five, and if you look at the difference, Kurevic is almost 1v1 in there, and if you go into the next clip, it's one of those weird moments where the ball kind of bounces, and Adebayor kind of looks at Kurevic, who then looks at him, and then Kurevic sort of just springs into life, really thinking, I think I'm going to get this here. And after that, it's all, he's had some big chances that he's missed, easy chances, but I would argue he's probably taken the hardest chance out of them all, because there's a lot to do from picking up the ball here, and he takes 2 touches to get himself into the box. He carries it. This is kind of like his big touch here towards the goal, and if you go into that final clip, it's a really, really good finish, because that's not a really,
it's a tight angle.
It's a very tight angle, and actually he strikes it really like it's not like a really clean hit like we maybe see from like Kieran Bowie, who strikes through the ball, but he just gets enough power and like enough swerve on the ball that when it does hit the inside of the post, it sort of spins in. And there's never been a more deserved goal for a player for the work rate and the effort he puts in. And I know he would be gutted. He'd be gutted about his role in Dundee United's goal, and I'm sure he'd be gutted about the chance he had, before that when Walton made the save. But it's after all the weeks of hard work, it was just great to see him get on the score sheet and celebrate. And I don't know how he got a nosebleed. I don't know if it was from all that running, because he had to go off for about 5 minutes afterwards, which left us in a bit of a tight spot for that time. But just delighted for him.
Just on the nosebleed, my theory is, if you look at his celebration, I think he does possibly hit himself in the face, which is an interesting approach. Maybe it does, but I mean, if you're wanting a wee break, if you're knackered from all the pressing, then sort of hit yourself in the face, you have to go off to get it looked at. genius if you ask me. But no, I think the sort of interesting thing for me was just watching. He certainly benefits from the fact that Adeboyega and Gallagher just kind of have this moment where, I mean, reading between the lines from what Jim Goodwin was saying afterwards, like Gallagher obviously missed Dundee United's game last weekend. He was brought back in. Can understand why you would do that. And they had Sam Cleo Harding on the bench, who, I think is quite highly thought of at Tannadice, and I think there's they've got sort of high hopes for him. He's already played this season. I think he played alongside Gallagher against, I think it was against Hearts at Tynecastle was his first start. And I thought it was interesting. He was on the bench, and I thought that maybe he might have come on later in the game where I think when Adeboyega had to go off, but it did. Gallagher's one of those sort of centre backs. You think normally you know what you're going to get from him. There's a reason there's a reason why he was capped by Scotland. There's a reason why he's played for teams at the top level for a while. But I just thought he looked a bit out of sorts on Saturday, and I think Hibs probably benefited from that. But that sort of almost like that indecision between him and Adeboyega, and that's sort of all the kind of encouragement that Kurevic needed. But I think if you go back to this clip here, you can almost see, like, watching this in real time, I sort of thought he's taken it too wide. And I thought, I understand why he's done that, because if you look at Gallagher trying to like cut him off by running across him, but I just sort of thought he's taken it too wide. He's made it more difficult for himself, and there's no chance that he's going to there's no chance that it's going to be a goal, and then obviously shut me up quite emphatically seconds later. But I think you talked about it. He doesn't sort of hit it cleanly. He almost kind of clips it.
Yeah, it's an interesting finish.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some people would say, "Oh, he's not hit that cleanly the way he's meant to," but I think he knows what he's doing. I think it is sort of.
Yeah.
It's. I
mean,
he's
definitely going. He's definitely going for that corner, and he's as he runs down, I don't think he ever glances up to sort of see. So he's obviously running into that space to get to a space in the box where he knows roughly where the keeper will be and roughly where he is, and can get the strike away. And it was a really good finish. And obviously he got the break with the spin on the ball. But Gallagher did have, obviously he backheeled it for Boyle's goal. He was sort of half blamed for this goal. He also passed it straight through for Boyle at one point in the first half, where I think Kurevic ended up having the shot at the goal as well. So it was a particularly tough afternoon for him.
Just a word on Jack Walton. I mean, I've been really impressed by him for Dundee United this season, and I think his positioning is actually pretty good here. That he's sort of covering the near post in case Kurevic tries to catch him out, but he's also in a fairly decent position for if it's played across him, and it's just maybe illustrates how good the shot was that still couldn't get to it. It's just that sort of. They always say to goalkeepers, like, the shots that are in the far corner, they're the hardest to get to. And I think we certainly saw that here. But moving on again, I think this is just...
this is just a bit more about Dundee United and just what they actually, what they did was they did what we do to teams. It's basically...
I was just going to say,
no, and that's exactly what it was. You can see as we're trying to play it from the back here, they're now able to put... that's Dalby pressing. You've got Trapanovsky waiting to go on Iredale there. You can see across the rest of the pitch, we're sort of matched up in the middle. It's difficult for Levitt to get on the ball. Same with Triant's on the other side. Middleton's actually sort of dropped out towards Warren O'Hora. And you can see Obita's about to be pressed as well. So if you go into the next clip, this kind of then forced us long. And we said during the game that for a long time, it was basically just like 3v3 either end. That's all that's happening. The midfield were kind of getting, it was proper basketball intense stuff, and the midfield were getting bypassed. And, to be fair to Gallagher at this point, he started to get the better of Kurevic in the air, and that led to, a bit more turnovers for Dundee United, and that's how they sort of built up some of their attacks and sort of got themselves back into the game. So if you go into the next clip, that's sort of what they did. And even when they started to play it from the back, and I think this is, you can see the three here are good, but they're just a wee bit too far over on the one side, and you can see Gallagher just sort of clips it out into the right hand side. If you go into the next clip now, where it's tricky, Dundee United are carrying the ball forward, and whereas in the first half they had players coming short and looking for the ball to feet, you can now see they've got players who are wanting it in behind, and that pushes our back line back, and it stretches across the pitch. And you can see this time Levitt's trying to get across to support Hoylett, who's trying to get back into position. If you go into that next clip, Levitt comes away. Now there's a space. Triantis is trying to get back in. You can see Rocky pointing to it. he's not going to come all the way out there for Dalby, especially now with Middleton and Trapanovsky running in behind. So those little changes just stumped us just a little bit. I mean, it wasn't like Goodwin did something that was mind-blowing, but it did make a massive difference, and it did obviously make...
Just said go out and play like Hibs, basically.
Basically, yeah, just running behind, stretch the back five, which they did, and they got themselves into better positions. And actually, if you go into this next clip, how many times have we seen this with maybe, it go from, Levitt to Triantis and out to Nicky Cadden on that side? Yeah. It was exactly the same. You can see it. It was actually Dalby here who plays it in. It gets moved across out to that left-hand side. And if you go into the next clip, then suddenly they're well, there's not a clip there, but they will whip the ball into the box and it goes out into those areas. So it was, and that's what they were doing. And it's hard, that's why we sometimes struggle against St Mirren and teams that set up similar to us, because, you kind of cancel each other out, playing out from the back, and then it does become a bit of long ball and picking up second balls. And when there's a bit of chaos in there, you just never know, you just never know. So, and that's how they got into it. But fortunately for us, because of the bench that we've got and the players off the bench, we were able to. We did change shape a little bit, which we'll maybe discuss on the video later on this week when Josh Campbell came on. But we, I think, if we just got the Hibs goal left to discuss, is that pretty much where we are now, Patrick? Yeah, we do. Yep. So we changed shape and we basically went to a front two. So kind of hard to spot in the game, but when Campbell comes on, he goes like that and points. So that meant Boyle and Kurevich became a two, and then Bowie and Gale and those different iterations when we made the subs, and Campbell came on to more play as a number 10, and sort of they then had Levitt, Triantis deep, Campbell as a 10, and Campbell was just trying to work his way across both sides of the pitch. Normally Hoylett tends to stay on the left. We've seen that from like his passing networks and things like that. He's usually a left-hand side player, whereas Campbell goes across both sides of the pitch. So in this example here, this is obviously 86th minute. This is Campbell in this position here, so getting in, playing the ball into Levitt. If you go into the next clip, Levitt scoops it out to Bowie, and this is why. This is why Josh Campbell is a very more than useful player in the squad, and this is what he can do off the bench. And I know some fans can roll their eyes when he comes on and feel like we're suddenly not going to play any more football, and it's going to be like this. But I think that's doing him a massive disservice, because you can see he held the ball up well there. He pops it into Levitt. It goes out to Bowie here, and now he's got this running power that not many other players have. If you go into the next clip, he has Bowie does really well on the ball. It's a really well-timed run. You can see Gale's peeled off into that back post position. And actually, if you go into that next clip, Campbell actually pulls it back into... He actually does all right. I actually think it's a bold call here. I actually think Gale goes too early. So that's my wild take this week. I think Gale goes a bit early, because I think he must know that Campbell's on his left foot and it's going to be a bit more awkward. He goes a little bit too early, and it gets intercepted.
The attack.
I think it is. And if you go to the next clip, where I think Campbell does really well is that the ball comes back to him, and you can see Bowie's sort of asking for the ball. Everybody's sort of, the crowd were a bit, because we just, we never took the chance there. But he just sort of composes himself. He takes an extra touch. He looks, and then you can see Nicky Cadden comes into frame there. He rolls it back into him. And then after that, we've seen Nicky Cadden do it all season. He's just got such a good left foot, such a good delivery. Gale's still in that position. You can see Dundee United have, defenders down in the box just after clearing the ball. And if you go into that final clip, nobody gets out to Nicky Cadden, or they do. I think Alan Campbell gets there, but that's too far away. And it's just a great weighted ball just over the top of everybody. Played onside there. You can see again, because of Josh Campbell, where he was positionally, that's kept one of the defenders on, and you can see Gale, and once he's in that, it's just that great striker's header down into the ground and up into the net, and just a great way to see out the game. And actually, when you look at obviously Miller came on for O'Hora as well. It was good to see him back in the team and come back on, because he had been such a crucial part. But that off the bench, Nicky Cadden, Bowie, Campbell and Gale, to be able to put those four players on towards the end of the game is just massive, because you've got Nicky Can's a great defender, but his attacking threat, his assists are brilliant. His goals, just what he offers in the final third. Gale's movement at that point, last part of the game, you don't want somebody like that coming on and moving off your shoulder. Bowie, we've seen when he came on, he's just an absolute battering ram and loves the physical side of the game, willing to run in behind. And then if you've got Josh Campbell, who's really willing to do the defensive work, but he's also willing to go and make those big sacrifice runs into the channel and do whatever is required. And I think, his role in that, us seeing out the game, shouldn't be underestimated, because he played really well when he came on.
Good points, well made. I think just, we see with Nicky Cadden, I mean, I think saw Dwight Gale on social media calling him a postman for his deliveries. But I think what I think is quite good is he can mix it up, in that, you can get those sort of, he can fizz low crosses across the box. He can this one was almost kind of went in slow motion. It was like very much the definition of a kind of floated cross. And it's just, I mean, part of it could be the stage of the game. He's fresh, the Dundee United defence aren't. But I mean, just, having the ability just to kind of like float it over the top, right to Gale, who has the easiest job in the world, and just nodding it into the ground and up over Walton. I mean, they're a nightmare to try and save. I think strikers are told, if you get that sort of chance, then downward headers, really difficult for goalkeepers to kind of judge the bounce for a start, and then just how they're going to come up off the ground. But just really, a really nice ending to the game. And as you saw here, with 86 minutes on the clock, and then I think it was 6 minutes of injury time added on, it gave Hibs that sort of little bit of breathing space, kind of calmed the nerves a little bit for that sort of last little bit. Because again, just going back to the start of the season, this was usually about the time where if Hibs were leading, then you started to get a little bit sort of antsy that they're if they sort of switch off a bit, if the opposition team is doing kind of what Hibs are doing, where they're bringing on subs who are changing the game, then that could be kind of curtains. But they seem to be getting a lot better at this. Just giving themselves that sort of extra breathing space, giving themselves a bit more. I mean, obviously it's good for goal difference as well. But I mean, I think aside from the first goal, the second and third goals for Hibs really, really well taken, really well worked, and not just an example of sort of somebody being, look at Jack Iredale winning the goal of the season, the PFA Scotland Awards on Sunday night. Obviously it's a good hit, and you look at the goals it was up against, they're all, a lot of them are very similar. It's like big hits from sort of 30-35 yards. But I think, when you look at Hibs, and the thing that stuck out to me for this was that none of the Hibs goals came from set pieces, which feels unusual. But it's I think it's when you see goals that are sort of being as well worked as they are, it's just, again, it's another sign of that sort of really, really kind of well drilled team that sort of like tactically they know what they need to do, when to do it, who needs to go where. And just like I said before, just reiterating, it must be a nightmare to play against, and it must be very fun to be a part of.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's that trust. I think earlier in the season, before we've seen what Nicky Cadden could do, Dwight Gale might not be moving it in that position because he doesn't know that Nicky Cadden can put that ball in there. But now he knows exactly that's where that ball's going to go, and he can be confident to stay in that area. And it's the same, with Campbell coming on and what Bowie does. We start to know what all the players can do and what their strengths are, and importantly as well, what they're not so good at, or what areas they just that other players can cover for them in those areas. And I think that's where we've got this, like, Gray's able to mix things and combine different sets of forwards and things like that. Obviously you don't want to do that too much, because players get, especially attacking players, you want them in a rhythm and you want them playing with each other and week to week. And I think we actually highlighted it's only really Triantis and Levitt that it's difficult for them to come off in games, because until Alassane Amani's up to speed, and obviously Newell's injured and Kwan's injured, nobody can really do what they do in the squad, really, in terms of their role. So it's actually quite funny. The defence, we've got cover at the back with Pateta and Miller and Iredale. Beta can probably go into where Iredale plays, and we've got sort of that, but it's just really interesting. The middle of the pitch is just where we need to protect those guys at all costs, because if one of them gets a knock between now and the end of the season, I think we might be struggling. But no, it was a great end to the game, and it was actually a really it was interesting to see Dundee United change things up and give us a bit of a run for our money in that half, and it was good to see Gray then respond with the subs and just how we gradually got ourselves back into the game. And great way to see it out. And I think that's Gail's sort of like 10th contribution. I think he's got 6 goals, maybe 4 assists now, which is just a great return considering the minutes that he's had.
Definitely. And just before we wrap it up, bit of transfer news or transfer rumour this morning, if you like, linking Hibs with Legia Warsaw striker Miguel Alfarela. I'm not going to assume that you've spent the entire day researching the ins and outs of the striker, Craig. But what have you made of this? Just in terms of, I know you've had a little look at him, but just what have you what's your sort of initial thoughts from this sort of this sort of rumor? Because it is, you look at some of the names that Hibs were linked with in January, and I think just with Garvin Stewart coming in it was December. I think there is going to be a bit of a different slant to transfer windows. If you look at Alassane Amani coming in from like the Danish second division, and you look at Atanasov, who I think was playing in Poland at the time. This is another sort of target. I mean, it's linked in January as well, according to the player himself, who said Hibs were keen to do a loan deal back then, but sort of seems to suggest that Hibs are kind of shopping in different markets now just to try and get players that maybe fit the bill.
Yeah, I mean, we said like when you look at he's obviously got impressive goal records. Things maybe haven't worked out from at Legia Warsaw, but he's obviously picked up things again in Greece. And when you look at his height, 5'8", and we were messaging earlier today as maybe is he a potential replacement for Dwight Gale? At the end, and potentially if he doesn't end up staying. That he certainly seems to fit that profile, and with maybe Dylan Venti being sold as well, there is a place in the squad for someone to potentially come off the bench and be in and around the penalty box, or again just changing that front three, and obviously again if depending on what happens with Martin Boyle, we do need we have to get signings in there and cover into that space. So certainly looks like he's got the pedigree, good age as well, at 28, coming in, probably hopefully his prime years, and if we can get him on a good fee or a loan or whatever it may well be, then I think he looks like he'll add a little bit of competition and a bit of quality up there, which is always what you're after in the front end of the pitch.
Yeah, I think you touched on it there, just in terms of forward players, contracts coming to an end and sort of uncertainty with the future, loans coming to an end, that sort of thing. I think it's, I think it does sort of feel like, I know they're obviously very keen to avoid another transitional summer, but I think there is going to be a fair amount of kind of transfer activity, and when you consider especially the top end of the park, in terms of who they could potentially lose. It probably makes sense to be casting the net far and wide for for potential targets. Whether or not anything comes of this, we'll obviously have to wait and see. But I think it's probably a lot easier now to the way that Gray wants to play. Then you can sort of see. I think if you look at the forward line at the moment, like they're all very different in terms of what they bring, what they offer. And this is like an ongoing criticism of the certainly the midfield in the past couple of years, like too many players in there who are too similar. And I think you can probably see Gray's efforts to to try and sort of change that. So I think it's an interesting summer coming up, especially with assuming unless sort of all goes to pot, then Europe as well, which needs a bigger squad. And
yeah, I was going to say I think that's the big thing as well. We've seen it with clubs that have finished third and got into that. There's no doubt that takes a massive hit on you in terms of your quality in your squad. So I think bringing in players that are comfortable playing in Europe and played in European football makes a lot of sense as well. I think sometimes the temptation would be, right, let's go and sign players from in and around the Scottish League so we can bolster our squad for that league form. But it's actually not a bad way to go. Actually, let's go and sign players that have played in Europe and we'll be able to handle European football. We've got a squad here that can go out and compete in the league. So it makes sense on that front. And it's always good to see the rumour mill starting nice and early.
Yes, gives us plenty to talk about well in advance of the season ending. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, as always, for joining me, Craig, just to go over to go over another Hibs win. There was a time earlier this season, I think, where we thought we weren't ever going to do that again. So to have as many as we have done has been a blessing. So thanks again for your insight, and thank you for watching us, for subscribing, for following along with what we're doing. As Craig mentioned earlier in the show, we are hoping to have another video this week looking at some of the players in a bit more detail. I think Josh Campbell and Junior Hoylett deserving of a bit more of an in-depth look at what they brought to the team, not just on Saturday's game, but across the season as a whole. So do keep an eye out for that. Please do consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Free to do so. You'll get notified every time we go live or we post post-match press conference video or any other type of content. And please do also check out the website, hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. You currently can get 6 months access to everything we do for just £1, which I'm biased, but I think that is a pretty good deal. So hibsobserver.co.uk, please do check us out. Thank you for watching, and we will see you again soon.